I am the proverbial black man in America. So here we are at Independence Day, July 4th weekend, and I'm talking with one of my kids, and they express the disdain for the day because, as they put it, it does not represent the day that black people in this country were given independence or freed. Now, frankly, that statement is correct, but a further examination of that position would assume that the basis upon which American independence is based, which was freedom from the governance of Britain, ceased on July 4th as well. And that isn't exactly true. Though the Declaration of Independence was ratified on July 4th, 1776, independence wasn't obtained until after the signing of the Treaty in Paris in 1783, September of 1783. So what we celebrate is the actual Declaration of Independence, not actual independence of the United States. So if we're going by what it is declared, we look at we look at what was espoused. We look at what the document stated on that day, and that document was drafted and ratified by. It was drafted by Thomas Jefferson, Wahoo Wah. It was ratified by the 13 states representatives therefrom, and it speaks in a number of parts. It specifically states why it was offered, and actually let me give you a couple of excerpts from it in an important part. The title is The Unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. And it starts in the opening paragraph. When in the course of human events, it has become necessary for one people to dissolve, for one people to dissolve its political bands which have connected between them and another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. So the Declaration lays out why the 13 colonies needed to separate. The second paragraph gives us the biggest quotable and potentially the most impactful lines of the entire declaration, and the lines that go down in history as reason for many of our objection or our disdain for the statement. And it states, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. Again, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such a form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So, in other words, this was being drafted so that the citizens of the colonies could pursue life, liberty, and pursuit of justice, pursuit of happiness. And because the government of Britain wasn't doing it, they were entitled to, by God and the nature's laws of God, to abolish it and start their own government. Now, it goes on. It doesn't just say, hey, we are entitled to do this, but it goes on to lay out the history of the relationship between Great Britain, its king, and the citizens of the colonies. And it lays out some of the atrocities, some of which include that they refused to enact laws to protect the people. They refused to set up judicial systems to prosecute the crimes. So that you had no legislator. And here now we have, in the United States, we have three branches of government: the legislature, the judicial, and the executive branches. So if you were to look at it in those three ways, they refused to set up the legislature to enact laws to govern the bodies. They refused to set up the judiciary to prosecute, to prosecute those for crimes. And then lastly, military. What Britain did, instead of allowing for the policing or the militarization of themselves, they sent large numbers of British soldiers to occupy sent large numbers of soldiers to occupy the Americas. And not only was there an occupation, as with most occupations, they were occupied and they were corrupt. So they occupied, they raped, pillaged, destroyed, stole from the Americans. And they were here primarily to collect taxes. So the rest of the Declaration of Independence talks about the terrible relationship between the Crown in Britain and the mistreatment of the American people. What it also makes sure to mention, though, is that there wasn't only this fractured or this destroyed relationship with the Crown, but at every step in the process, the American citizens, who were the cousins and the family members of those in Britain, informed them of the injustices that they perceived to be taking on here in the Americas. And at every step, the British citizens turned a blind eye. So in the midst of all the declining relationships, in the midst of the poor treatment that the Americans were the recipients of, they informed the British citizens that they were going to be like the rest of the world, enemies in war, peace in friendship, friends during peace. And then it subsequently just lays out who each of the parties was and what gave them the authority to sign for the 13 colonies. And what's so interesting, though, if you go out and read this declaration, is that the words themselves speak of a freedom that any people that have suffered oppression would endorse. But the glaring irony is that it almost spot on recites the American treatment of African descendants at the same time. If you take a moment and revisit it and replace Britain with America and replace Black people with America's place in the Declaration of Independence. So whereas in the Declaration of Independence, America is accusing Britain of crimes against man. If you swapped out, instead of it being Britain, you put in the Americas or the United States, and instead of America, you put in Black people or Native Americans, for that matter, the shoe would fit almost as cleanly as Cinderella's slipper. The audacity of a Congress to posture for freedom while at the same time pursuing an aggressive, harsh, cruel, void of moral system based on slavery. This Declaration of Independence advocated the freedom of governance for America while it suffocated the breath of freedom from hundreds of thousands of men and women born in this land who built this nation. It was not until the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, then Juneteenth, Liberation Day, Jubilation Day, aka Freedom Day, in June of 1865, almost 90 years later, that Black people were granted governmentally endorsed freedom and were released from slavery. Juneteenth is the day that the Union Army General Gordon Granger announced federal orders in Galveston, Texas on June 19, 1865, proclaiming that all slaves in Texas were free. Slave owners had been moving their slaves from other states to Texas during the Civil War to maintain possession of their perceived chattel instead of yielding to the prevailing Union. Not only had the Confederacy lost the war, many ran and dragged their enslaved with them. Texas was the last bastion of this sadistic system. Abe Lincoln declared 2.5 years before, on January 1st, 1863, that freedom from bondage became the law in the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation began with, on the first day of January in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people thereof shall be in rebellion against the United States, shall be thenceforth and forever free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress them in any efforts they may make to accrue their freedom. Which of these documents or proclamations do I celebrate? The one that formed the American government, separating it from Britain, making it independent? Or the one that led the government to enforce abolition? Some see this as a paradox of being a conscious Black person. Frederick Douglass stated, "The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. These are words that he spoke to the White House. In 1852, when Douglass was invited to the White House, he chided the White House in front of a white American audience, stating in part, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" It's a day which reveals to him more than any other day the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham. Now, however, after Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation some 11 years later, Frederick Douglass, and actually part of the Emancipation Proclamation included provisions calling for black men to be enlisted in the U.S. Army. Douglass fervently began recruiting for the Union. As he stated then, once let the black men get upon his person the brass letter U.S., let him get an eagle on his button, representing the country, a musket on his shoulder, and bullets in his pocket. There is no power on earth that can deny that he has earned his right to American citizenship. So with the changing of the United States' official position on slavery, one of the greatest of Americans, Frederick Douglass, endorsed and promoted the enlisting of black Americans for the cause of freedom. So where should we stand? Where do I stand? The Bible does not say thou shalt not celebrate Independence Day. It doesn't say thou shalt celebrate Independence Day. But it does give us some idea on the perspective of celebration or understanding of freedom. It righteously celebrates, and there's such big recognition of one holiday in particular in the New and Old Testament. That's the Passover. The Passover being a holiday that celebrates the last of the 10 plagues that God rendered upon the Pharaoh, who enslaved the Egyptians for hundreds of years, subjecting them to backbreaking labor and unbearable horrors. And after numerous requests by God's prophet Moses, the Pharaoh refused to let them go. He afflicted them, destroying everything from their livestock to their crops. And at the stroke of midnight, God visited the last of the 10 plagues, killing the firstborn of every Egyptian home, while sparing all of Israel's children, or particularly parties with lamb's blood on their door, passing over their homes, hence passing over the name of the holiday. Subsequently, Pharaoh's resistance was broken, and he virtually chased. He couldn't get rid of the the Israelite slaves fast enough. Independence Day doesn't represent the Black Passover. The equivalent for Black Americans is commemorated by the eradication of legal slavery.